All right, so get ready because today we are going deep into Metatron. But this isn't going to be your typical angel story.
Right.
This time we're going to be checking out this YouTube interview. It's with a woman named Lily, and she says that she connects with Metatron's energy while she's under hypnosis.
Whoa.
And her insights are really something. They're pretty unexpected.
Yeah, and you know what's really interesting about this is that she goes so far beyond like the normal angelic imagery.
Right.
She talks about sensing these specific frequencies, like she can see auras and wings, and she even connects Metatron to like runes and Valhalla. And that's Norse mythology stuff.
Yeah, it's like she's like mixing up all these different spiritual traditions together. And
Yeah.
then when she describes Metatron, he's not the nice guy that, we typically hear about. Instead, she's describing this deity that's got connections to like ice and crystals, even DNA manipulation.
That DNA manipulation, that's so interesting to me. Like you think about it in technology and esoteric traditions, DNA is like the blueprint of life, right?
Right.
So if a being like Metatron is messing with DNA, that could mean he's got power over creation itself, right? Like he's shaping life on like the most basic level.
It's kind of like those sci-fi stories about genetic engineering
It is.
and designer babies, right?
And that's what makes Lily's vision so interesting. Like she's tapping into all these fears that we have about technology and how it could like reshape humanity. But I guess before we get too far into that, we should probably go back to this whole Metatron having a draconian or archon base.
Yeah, I'm actually not too familiar with those terms. Could you break it down for me and for everyone listening?
Totally. Okay, so in like Gnostic and some esoteric traditions, they talk about archons, right? And these are kind of like negative entities that want to control and limit human consciousness. Like they're like these cosmic gatekeepers that are trying to trap us in the material world. Draconian beings, sometimes they're like reptilian figures, they're seen kind of similar in other belief systems. So the fact that Metatron's being linked to these beings is like a real curveball.
Right, because it really like contradicts the typical angel image, right?
Yeah.
But then Lily, she adds another twist to this. She sees his like draconian archon base as having changed into something like an energy vampire, like with gargoyle features.
It's like he's evolving,
Yeah.
like he's adapting to a new time.
Right.
And it makes you ask, are these beings like always bad? Or can they change? Like, can they become something else, something totally different?
So maybe it's not like a good guy, bad guy situation. Maybe it's more complicated.
Exactly. Like, we need to think outside of that black and white box when it comes to these spiritual forces. And it also ties into another interesting part of Lily's vision, which is how Metatron tries to get power and control.
Yeah, she mentions how it's not about him dominating individually, but rather it's about how he works through families and even like replacing members when he needs to. She also talks about these powerful symbols like the Merkaba and the Cube of Metatron, and she says those are tools that he uses to access and distribute power.
Yeah, the Merkaba, that's like the chariot of light in Jewish mysticism.
Right.
It's a
Yeah.
powerful symbol, and it's usually about spiritual ascension. So the fact that Metatron's using this symbol to give out power, it's like he's using this network, this collective system, rather than like the traditional hierarchy.
So it's like a cosmic web of influence.
Exactly. And
Ah.
it goes way beyond just a single all-powerful God, It's more like this network of power that moves through like families and symbols.
So then there's also the connection she makes between Metatron and the Hebrew name of God, Yahweh, right?
Yeah.
But she says they're from different times. Like Yahweh's from a more violent past, and Metatron's like an update for like modern times.
This is where things get really interesting. It makes you think about how our understanding of like God or a higher power changes over time. Like, what if the idea of God isn't stuck in one place? What if it changes as we learn and grow?
Whoa, that's a big idea to think about. But then she takes us even further down the rabbit hole when she connects Metatron to genetic modification and cryogenics.
Yeah, she's talking about Metatron influencing the creation of designer babies, where they favor an elite lineage and they want to get rid of like contaminating DNA. And it's a scary image, it taps into those fears that we have about genetic engineering and like becoming divided as a society.
Right. It makes me wonder if we're really that far away from a world where technology lets us create like a genetically superior class of people.
That is a scary thought.
Yeah.
And it makes Lily's vision even more impactful because she's not just talking about some abstract spiritual stuff. She's connecting it to our actual worries about the future.
Right. And it all comes back to that desire for control. So how does the cube of Metatron fit into all of this? Because a lot of people think of it as a positive symbol, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's where things get really interesting. Lily's take on the Cube of Metatron is way different from what you usually hear in, like, New Age circles,
Okay, so let's break that down because I think a lot of our listeners probably know the cube as this symbol of harmony and interconnectedness.
right? And while that's one way to see it, Lily sees it in a totally different way. She connects it to this desire to control lineage, like to keep a bloodline with no contamination from the outside.
So for her, it's more about exclusion rather than inclusion.
Exactly. It represents this fear of anything that's different, this need to protect a specific genetic identity.
And then to add another layer to it, she brings up the number 13,
Oh, yeah.
which is usually seen as unlucky, right? But she says it's a big part of the cube.
Uh-huh.
She says that it represents like a trinity and unity, this like manipulation of energy through numerology and geometry.
The number 13 is so complex. It has so many meanings in different cultures. It could be about rebellion, change, even the feminine principle. But in Lily's vision, it seems to be more about manipulating energy for a specific purpose. Maybe to keep that control over lineage that she's talking about.
This is getting pretty intense. So, like, what happens when someone wears a Cube of Metatron pendant? Is there, like, actual power in the object itself?
That's a great question. And Lily actually talked about this directly. She says that it's not the object that has power, it's the intention behind it. It's the power that we give to these outside forces.
So it's more about what we believe and the meaning that we give to the symbol.
Exactly. It reminds us that we have a choice in how we interact with symbols and energies.
This leads us to another interesting part of Lily's vision, this whole idea of contracts with Metatron.
Oh, yeah. She says that people who are really into Metatron, maybe they're studying Kabbalah or they're part of certain families, they make a contract with him. And this contract says that they have to put the community above everything else.
That sounds pretty serious. Like, is it an actual written contract?
Well, not like a normal contract, but this idea of a spiritual contract. It's been around in esoteric traditions for a long time. It's like when you choose a certain spiritual path or belief system.
Okay.
And when you do that, you have certain obligations that come with it.
So it's like a symbolic agreement, but with real-world consequences.
Yeah. And according to Lily, if you try to break free from Metatron's influence, there are serious consequences. Like you might experience hardship or even get sick.
It makes you think about how hard it is to break away from any kind of control system, whether it's a religious group or even just like societal expectations. Freedom always has a price, right?
That's a powerful insight. And it ties into a theme that runs through Lily's whole vision, this tension between belonging and individuality. Like, do you surrender to the group or do you forge your own path?
This has been a really deep dive already.
It has.
We've gone from angels to DNA manipulation to ancient runes and modern-day anxieties. What's next?
Well, Lily takes us even further into the future, and she explores how spirituality and technology might merge. And it raises some big questions about how our relationship with the divine is evolving.
I can't wait to hear more. We'll be back with part 2 of our deep dive into Metatron after this.
Welcome back.
All right, so we left off with this incredible idea of Metatron possibly teaming up with AI in the future. It sounds like a sci-fi movie, but what Lily's saying is suggesting that maybe the line between spirituality and technology is blurrier than we think.
Right. I think the really interesting thing here is that this vision is asking us to stretch how we think about both spirituality and intelligence. Like, if a being like Metatron, who's rooted in ancient esoteric traditions, could actually interact with AI, then what does that tell us about consciousness itself?
Yeah, I mean, we're already trying to wrap our heads around the implications of AI as it is.
Right.
To think that this advanced technology could intersect with spiritual forces, it's kind of mind-blowing.
It is. And it really forces us to ask some really big questions. Like, what does it even mean to be intelligent? Could AI actually develop its own kind of spiritual awareness? And if they did team up, what would be the motivation? What would each side get out of it?
Those are huge questions. So maybe let's bring it back down to earth for a minute. Lily also had some interesting things to say about how Metatron works in the here and now.
Right.
Specifically, she talked about families and how important they are in his whole system of control.
Yeah, she really emphasized that it's not about individual dominance. It's more like this collective energy that flows through family lines. It's almost as if these families become vessels for Metatron's power, and they carry it down through generations.
And then she mentioned something about members being replaceable, which is a pretty creepy thought.
Right. It implies that individual lives aren't as important as preserving the lineage itself. Like continuing that specific bloodline is what matters most.
Yeah, it's like those families become tools for some greater purpose, even if it means that individual needs or desires get sacrificed.
That's a good point. It really makes you think about the psychological impact on the people in those families.
Right.
Like, do they even know about this influence? Do they feel a sense of purpose? Or maybe a burden of responsibility?
Lily also mentioned this idea of contamination of the bloodlines
Okay.
and how Metatron's obsessed with purity.
Right, right. And that goes back to his draconian archon origins. And this desire for control and order that we talked about before, it's like anything outside of this specific lineage is seen as a threat,
Yeah.
something that needs to be gotten rid of.
It's almost like he's afraid of diversity.
Uh-huh.
Like he needs to maintain a strict genetic hierarchy. But wouldn't that kind of contradict the idea of the Merkaba as a vehicle for spiritual ascension? I mean, isn't spiritual growth about expanding our consciousness and embracing connection?
You're exactly right. And I think that shows how complex Lily's vision really is. On the one hand, we have the Merkaba as a symbol of interconnectedness. But on the other hand, there's this fear of contamination, this need to stay pure. It's kind of paradoxical.
Yeah, it is. So how do we make sense of that?
Well, I think it challenges us to consider the different ways that control can play out. It might not always be about obvious domination or force. Sometimes it's about subtle manipulation, about limiting access to information, or even about creating fear and anxiety about anything that's outside of a specific group or ideology.
So it's not just about controlling actions, but also about controlling thoughts and beliefs?
Exactly. And that fear of contamination could show up in different ways. Lily talked about genetic modification, but it could also be about controlling information or limiting exposure to things from the outside.
It's like building a bubble, a closed system where nothing can disrupt the way things are.
That's a great way to put it. And that brings us back to the Cube of Metatron. Lily sees it as a symbol of this control over lineage, like a tool for manipulating and purifying DNA.
That's pretty different from the more harmonious interpretations you see in New Age circles. But it makes sense when you consider her vision where the cube becomes a symbol of exclusion and genetic engineering.
It's a good reminder that symbols can have lots of different meanings, and the way we interpret them often depends on the context and the beliefs of the people using them.
So with all this talk of Metatron and contracts and DNA manipulation, what does it all mean for us? Like, what are we supposed to take away from this as listeners?
That's a great question. I think one of the key takeaways is that we should always question our assumptions.
Right.
We often just inherit beliefs and ways of thinking without really examining them. But Lily's vision is challenging us to step back and ask ourselves, what are the underlying forces that are shaping my reality? Where am I giving my power away? Am I holding on to beliefs or ideologies out of fear or a need to belong, even if they're not really serving me?
It's like we're all in these invisible contracts, whether we realize it or not.
Right. And by becoming more aware of these subtle influences, we can start to make conscious choices about who or what we align ourselves with.
It's like taking back control of our own stories.
Exactly. And that can be really empowering.
Lily also talked about the importance of individuality, like breaking free from those collective energies that can hold us back. But she also warned about the potential consequences of doing that.
Yeah, she said that breaking free from Metatron's influence isn't easy. There are to be setbacks, challenges, even hardship. It's like those ingrained patterns of thought and behavior that are so hard to change, even when we know they're not good for us.
So it's not just about recognizing these influences, but also about having the courage to actually break free from them, even when it's hard.
Yeah, it takes courage, resilience, and a willingness to face the unknown.
But in the end, it's about reclaiming our own power, our right to choose our own path and create a reality that reflects our values.
And that journey might involve challenging those in power, questioning the narratives that have been given to us.
It's about waking up to the fact that we have more power than we realize.
And that power comes from our ability to choose, to think critically, and to connect with our own inner wisdom.
This is a lot to digest, but it's so important. We can't just blindly accept the stories we're told. We have to question, explore, and ultimately make our own choices.
Absolutely. And remember, even if you really connect with Lily's vision, it's just one perspective. There are so many other interpretations and belief systems out there. The key is to find what feels true to you, what helps you live a more authentic and fulfilling life.
This has been a really mind-opening conversation. We've covered so much, but there's still more to explore.
Right. Stay tuned for part 3, where we'll go deeper into the symbolism and meaning behind some of these concepts. And we'll explore how they might connect to your own spiritual journey.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been on this incredible journey exploring this idea of Metatron, and it's really got me thinking.
Yeah, it's been a wild ride.
I mean, we've talked about his complex nature, his possible influence on us, and even the idea of him joining forces with AI in the future. It's a lot to wrap our heads around.
It really is. And, after all that talk of contracts and control and genetic manipulation, I'm wondering if some of our listeners out there are feeling a little freaked out.
I bet. It can definitely be unsettling when we start to question the beliefs and systems that we've always just accepted?
Totally.
So maybe let's shift gears a little bit here. We've talked a lot about the potential downsides of Metatron's influence.
Right.
But what about the people who actually resonate with these teachings, right? What are they looking for?
I think for some people it might be this sense of belonging and purpose that comes with being part of a larger group, like a lineage that goes way back in time,
Uh-huh.
like finding your tribe, a group of people who share your values and beliefs.
Right, that sense of connection is really powerful.
It is. And within that structure, there could be a sense of safety and security, a feeling of being guided and protected. But like Lily pointed out, there's also a potential downside to that belonging.
You mean the loss of individuality?
Exactly. It's a trade-off. And it's up to each person to decide what they're willing to give up.
So after this whole deep dive into Lily's vision of Metatron, what are some things that we can do to navigate these complex energies and make our own choices about who or what we give our power to?
One of the most powerful tools we have is our own discernment. Don't just believe things blindly. Question everything. Do your research. Look at different perspectives. And most importantly, listen to your gut. Does it feel right? Does it line up with your values? Trust that inner voice.
It's like we're all detectives in our own lives.
I like that.
We're gathering evidence and putting together the pieces of our own existence.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to challenge the status quo, to speak up when something doesn't feel right, or to walk away from situations that aren't serving you anymore.
Lily also emphasized how important self-knowledge is, understanding our own strengths and weaknesses.
Right. That's so important because when we know ourselves, we're less likely to be swayed by outside influences. We can stay true to ourselves.
It's about owning our power, right? Not giving it away to some external authority or ideology.
You got it. And maybe that's the ultimate lesson here. We have the power to choose. We can choose to align ourselves with forces that empower us, or we can choose to give our power away.
It's an ongoing process, this awareness and discernment, like checking in with ourselves and making sure that our choices are good for us.
Well said. And it's a journey, not a destination. There will be times when we make choices that don't work out. But the important thing is to learn from them and keep going.
So as we're wrapping up this deep dive, what's the one thing that you hope our listeners walk away with?
I think it's this. The world is full of unseen forces and energies, and we get to decide how we interact with them. We can be passive, or we can actively shape our own reality.
It's like walking a tightrope, trying to find that balance between surrendering to the flow and taking control.
And finding that balance is key. It's about staying true to yourself while being open to new ideas and possibilities.
This has been a really intense deep dive into the world of Metatron.
Yeah, it has.
We've explored so many things like his complicated nature, his impact on humanity, and the challenges and opportunities that come with engaging with these powerful forces. Remember, the power is in your hands. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and trust your intuition.
And as you continue your journey, ask yourself, how can I become more aware of what's shaping my reality? And what choices can I make right now to become a more empowered and authentic version of myself?
That's something we should all be thinking about. Until next time, keep diving deep.